Welcome to the Sage Women podcast, hosted by Melanie White and Dr. Nick Engera. We have real conversations with real women, health professionals, and coaches who share stories about perimenopause, menopause, and a range of women's health issues. Please subscribe so you get the latest updates every fortnight.
Hi, it's Melanie White here on the Sage Women podcast, and we're talking about something important and a little bit different today. We have a panel discussion talking about the importance of connection and community, especially when it comes to really probably to topics like mental health, menopause, and perimenopause. The reason that community and connection are so important is that if we're going to have sensitive conversations like these, we really need to have psychological safety, and that comes from trust and having deep connections. And today I want to introduce three amazing women from the Sage team who are all over this stuff, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you, starting with Danielle Dobson.
Hi Mel, thanks for that. I'm Danielle Dobson, and I love working with senior leaders in their teams to help them find solutions to challenges that might seem complex, like personally and professionally. I help them with tools to get more out of life and also to help them do it their own way.
Perfect. Thanks, Danielle. And over to Jenny.
Hi everyone, my name is Jenny O'Brien. I'm based in the beautiful Barossa in South Australia. So my area of focus is about helping women reconnect with their true selves and live with more purpose and joy. Do that mainly through our retreats and wellbeing programs and coaching. And I love creating space where women can take a break, recharge, and discover more about themselves.
I want to go there, Jenny. Sounds amazing. And Michelle.
Yeah, hi. I'm based in Adelaide, South Australia, and I work as a wellbeing co-design specialist and coach, and I work with midlife professionals, business owners, and leaders, basically around empowering them to foster calm, confident, and conscious leadership. So basically working on wellbeing, mental fitness, and leadership excellence.
Thanks, Michelle. So glad you're all here today, and I am really looking forward to some deep discussion. Now, to start off, I have a question for all of you. Because you all have such a strong focus on connection and relationships and community, I want to know, where did this start for you and why does it still remain a focus? So starting with you, Danielle.
Great question. I guess like most of us, childhood. It all began in childhood. So I grew up in this little blink-and-you-miss it town in the Yarra Valley in Victoria, where it was beyond the train line, and it was well known for having farms and orchards, grapes, of course. And my parents were very active community members. They moved away from their village in the city of Melbourne, and so they created another village and a community for themselves. They were big contributors and volunteers in the community with sport, community groups, things like that. We all played community sport. I worked in the local fruit shop, and that's where I really built the foundations for connection to people. And this isn't what I would say a gang, as in everyone like me, but a range of people throughout my community. And I didn't really realize the importance of that and what that gave me, later on in life. And the other thing is that I'm from a big family. Dad's one of 9, mum's one of 8.
Wow.
So I've got many, many cousins. So when we all got together, we were just one of many. We weren't, particularly special or anything like that. So we knew we were part of something bigger. But when that all really hit home was when I moved out of my village and community. I moved to Melbourne and then I moved overseas. And so those foundational experiences of knowing and enjoying and knowing the benefits of my community served me really well when I lived and worked in 5 different countries. So I knew I got better at building community, knowing who to connect with and why, and building connection through a range of different activities within a community. So volunteering, sport, and then it became a whole lot easier when I had kids. So, there were times that it was really challenging and I felt very alone, and particularly countries where English wasn't the mother tongue. So now the reason why it's so important to me is that I know that having that benefit of community and connection, having even just the one person who can open up doors and plug you into a community is so beneficial. So that's why I continue to do that work today, personally and professionally.
Yeah, I'm hearing that it's kind of part of your DNA.
Mm-hmm.
It's the foundation of everything you do. It's that solid base that you can lean on if you need help.
Absolutely.
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Danielle. Jenny.
Yeah, so interesting, Danielle. I grew up in country as well. So I grew up in regional South Australia, and it's just all I've ever known is that sort of that community country life, you know, played a million sports, was involved in the local footy club. I remember going there every Friday night, every weekend. And my parents owned the local news agency and post office in the main street. And I remember probably, you know, as early as 8 or 9, I used to work every Saturday morning for a polywaffle. Was my
Isn't that child labour?
It is child labour, but that's okay. And then after school, I used to, so back in the day where, you know, you would go and do the paper round. And so I would have, you know, a wheelbarrow full of like all the local papers and all of the magazines. And then I would go and drop them off and sell them to all of the local business owners in the main street. So it was just like, you know, you felt like you knew everybody, you knew what was going on. There was always people at mum and dad's shop out the back. They had this space where there was always people playing cards. So I don't know, like, so for me, that sort of connection to community has always been there. And particularly to my parents instilled the importance of giving back, and also my grandma. Like, she was a pretty special and amazing lady, you know, she loved our family, loved her community. So she instilled that into me. And it's just stuck through all of my career. I've worked in, you know, local government for a long time, state government, not for profits. I've worked overseas, and a lot of it has sort of been community focused. And now in my business, building a community is just at the heart of what I do. And I feel like it's almost like naturally I'm like that. So, and, you know, I've gone through some pretty sort of big periods of burnout and, you know, feeling quite alone. And when I create connection, I've seen the importance of the impact on our well-being. So, you know, for creating a space where women feel supported and heard and safe, that's the magic of community. And that's probably one of my biggest drivers of what I do now in my business.
That's amazing, Jenny. And it's similar to Danielle, that growing up in a regional area and having that role modelling around you to build a community. And do you still work for Polly Waffles?
I probably would though. I was like, I love a good polywaffle.
That's funny.
Thanks, Jenny.
Saturday morning, 3 hours, and I got a polywaffle, and I think like I drink, but anyway, you know, back in the day when they used to rip the covers off magazines, so I used to get that as well. So it was probably a return magazine, but yeah,
it felt like a good reward at the time.
Yeah.
Do they even make polywaffles anymore?
Yes. No. I saw them the other day, actually. They do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us your story, Michelle.
Well, it's interesting because when thinking about, you know, what really does connection mean, and where did my passion come from in this? The quote that kept ringing in my ears was, "It takes a community to raise a child," and so, you know, I think about my own childhood, and I grew up in a village because my family was 6 children, like 6 girls, and then, you know, mum and dad, so there was 8 of us at home. And then I lived in the city, but our neighbourhood was, everyone knew everyone. Like, you know, we all looked out for each other. We all went to the local school together. We all played sport together. So even though we were in the city, we kind of had some of those same things. And we also grew up in a church community, which, you know, kind of gave that sense of connection to something greater and more meaningful than just ourselves, or myself. So then when I started my career, I was quite young and I moved to a country location. So I moved to a community on the west coast of South Australia and was in a community development role. And so my role was really around helping the community to come up with solutions to support young people, because youth work was my background. But at the same time, what I learnt was about what I gave up to be in that space, because if you weren't born and bred in a country town, and you ladies will understand this, you weren't born and bred in a country town.
You're not a local.
You're not a local. If you didn't drink, and I was there as a role model, so hanging out at the pub really wasn't a real option. And if you weren't there on weekends to play sport, you really were alone in a community. So I had fantastic professional connection. I created that space of safety and connection for young people in the community, but at an awareness of what it was that was important for my own well-being, happiness and joy at that point in my life. So that was like, I think I was 20, and then I came back to Adelaide when my contract ended, and I stayed in the youth and community development sector for a very long time. And I guess in that space, it was really around just recognizing that social connection is pivotal to everything, seeing young people, not living with their families and the impact that has. And then how do you create a healthy community around them so that they can grow and flourish in life? And then I went on and worked in local government, and I had the privilege of Martin Seligman doing his Thinkers in Residence in Adelaide and being exposed to Perma Plus, or Perma and then Perma Plus, and really resonating with engagement, and that being a pivotal foundation of well-being. So that's kind of, I've seen it from working in different cultures by going and living overseas and working in a post-conflict environment and really understanding how community is so important for healing an environment. It's kind of run through in everything that I've done in my career. And now in my business, it's about ensuring that fostering, what I hear a lot from women particularly is that as they are in that sandwich generation, when they're taking care of everyone else, it's finding time to connect in with those things that make them feel connected outside of their carer role. And so that's, kind of a really important thing. And then, seeing the impact of people going virtual with a lot of their work, and that transition back or staying where they're doing, the splinters that are attached to that in terms of people feeling really connected and engaged are quite real.
It's a broad life experience you've had, Michelle, locally and overseas. And I love that you started in the city and then went to a country town and went, oh, connection looks different here, and then back out again. It's you all have common threads and yet differences that really illustrate the power of community and where it's come from for you. And I love the stories that you've shared. Thank you. I guess now I want to send a question your way, Danielle, about any common misconceptions that people might have about connection.
Well, I can't speak for everyone, but what I have noticed increasingly is mixing up, I think, the definitions or the perceived intention of the word connection, because we often use it in the context of social media. So in particular on LinkedIn, that's where I hang out. So, please accept my invitation to connect. I'd love to connect. And it's really, being a friend or, like on Facebook or whatever. However, the deeper meaning of the word connection, it really implies something more than that. However, I think we've kept it at this surface level. And then I think because we're missing maybe the inherent meaning about the depth of the word, we're keeping surface level. So expecting to give surface but maybe sometimes receive deeper. I think can be an expectation gap. So I think that's where a lot of the challenges come from.
And how do you think we can combat that disparity, those misconceptions, to help people engage more effectively?
Well, I think it's a matter of not necessarily fighting what is, but focusing on how, what's most important to each of us. So looking at, what is at the core of who we are and looking at what connection really means for each of us. And I don't want to force my definition on anyone else, but I believe that it's connecting with yourself. So that's, who you are and your, that core of who you are, connecting with others. And that can be, maybe one or two really important people who you can be really honest and raw with.
Yeah.
And then also others being the wider village. And then connecting with nature. So your external environment, the tree, trees, nature, parks, bushlands, whatever it is, because we're intrinsically linked. So I think focusing on truer connections, but in terms of that process, it's so important to, I believe, in the work that I've done with others and on myself primarily, it's really important to connect with ourselves, really know who we are, who we are at the core of who we are, our essence and what's most important. Because I feel like if we don't know that, we can't really truly connect with others. It doesn't matter what we tell ourselves, we cannot connect with others. And that all starts with respect for ourselves, self-compassion, self-acceptance, self-respect, self-awareness. Because when we do that, we can bridge those expectation gaps, because a lot of the, I guess, challenges that we have, the uncomfortable emotions, the, things like loneliness, disappointment, frustration, in my humble opinion, they're all to do with expectation gaps. The expectations gaps between the quality of the relationships we have, that we actually have, versus the quality of the relationships that we actually want. It's a big gap. And that includes that relationship with ourselves. So that's that expectation gap. So how do we do that? Well, assume rather than ask. You be clear, as Brene Brown says. Clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And dial down judgment. Be curious and respectful, because, when we judge, we shut down any opportunities for connection with ourselves or with others. And also, if we judge others as a group, we don't mean it, but we can dehumanize them. Yeah. And we can engage in something that philosophers call soul blindness. So we don't see the person. We're not connecting with the human. We're dialing down or eliminating any opportunities for true connections to human beings. So I would say be respectful, be honest, be open, be curious, and see the human in everybody.
That common humanity, looking for the common threads, the traits that connect us all, suspending judgment. And I love the way you talked about this expectation gap and the difference between the superficial and the deeper connection. And as you were talking, I actually visualized a plug going into a wall socket. Like, to me, that's connection. It's that fit, isn't it? You don't just hover the plug over the outside of the holes, do you? You kind of lock it in. There's a level of commitment there, and an intrinsic vulnerability. And anyway, now I'm waffling, but I love your definition.
No, but that's it, because really, if we look at how we've evolved, because I always go back to how we all evolved, hunter gatherer, or what nature intended for us, connecting with nature, and we evolved as a species by connecting and collaborating. So but what happened in that respect is that it wasn't just a take; it was a give. So you were born into a tribe, and you had a certain identity, and you were expected to contribute at a certain level. So you didn't, have a claim in terms of your identity on the group. You served the group for a greater good, which was typically survival. I think that's what happens now. There's this expectation that we join a community, and there's a claim of, the identity we bring, that we must be treated in that way of the identity first, rather than contributing to the good of the group, the community, as this person playing this role. I think the more we are aware of that, I think the greater the opportunities for really, truly connecting and truly achieving things, the big problems, the little problems, and everything in between, with true, intention, respect, and sustainability.
It really does start with that self-awareness, that knowing yourself, connecting with yourself, being able to get perspective, evaluate your expectations. Yeah. And to know that, as you say, if you're part of a community, it's the community vision that you're joining for, not your own needs. First cap off the rank.
Yeah.
Thanks, Danielle. And Michelle, I've got a question for you now. I know that you've done work in a lot of different contexts, but I'm interested if you can recall a specific experience of how either a connection or a community was transformational for an organisation that you've worked in.
Yeah, I can probably think of several. The one I will share is probably around the work that I did most recently in place-based financial wellbeing project, where basically we brought together a group of 10, actually 11 organisations who wanted to make a difference around financial inclusion and wellbeing, not only for their broader community, but for their clients, their consumers, their employees, their contractors, and then the community at whole. And I think through that, like, it wasn't just one organisation that was impacted, it was all of them, in that having champions across each of those organisations come together and want to come up with actions that were practical, that would enable change, and having that shared vision, that shared purpose, and each of them going and working on individual goals, but sharing that learning across. What it did for one organisation in particular is they hadn't thought about the touch points within their organisation where they may have been able to provide a different response to their clients. And also they hadn't thought about how it was impacting their own employees, and, what touch points were they to actually provide support that would better improve the well-being of both their clients and their employees. And so just from them being part of this local solution, local leaders, local solution, what it did was they took that knowledge and went back to their organisations, and then were able to have those deep discussions within the organisation, and then change systems and put supports in play to then be able to, a simple example was reviewing their intake and assessment. It was a not-for-profit organisation. They were providing support to families that were breaking down, but financial wellbeing hadn't been one of the questions. Yet we know that relationship stress often comes from financial wellbeing. So being able to include that and then see and provide a whole different range of responses. So that flowed through to then looking at their employees and then looking at how that may have been impacting and then putting strategies in place to provide supports, so that what it did was it opened the conversation and made those taboo subjects that we often don't like talking about really practical, really open, really honest and transparent. And so then, as a whole organisation, they were then able to look at, even when they're applying for grants, it shifted them to a point of going, does this fit our values around wellbeing, financial inclusion? And so they would say no to applying for something that wasn't in line with where they really wanted to be going and where they wanted to be putting their energy. So it had a real spin-off effect for everyone as a result of that. If that answers your question.
Yeah, it kind of builds on part of what Danielle was talking about, with that level of self-awareness and understanding and perhaps some introspection. And I think what I'm hearing is by bringing 11 organisations together to kind of look under the hood and say what's going on, they were learning from each other and taking things back to their organisations and putting a few things in place and then going, and what about that? What's the ripple effect? Where else can we be doing this? And it's interesting that you talked about touch points, because a touch point is a point of connection, right? And it sounds like, what are those points of connection? Are they effective? What's the communication like? Is there enough of those touch points to have people engaged and working effectively? And then looking more broadly, what are some of the systemic changes that we can all make to improve connection within and between our teams?
Yeah, and the great thing in that, with that particular touch point, the actual outcome was that they increased awareness across 13,000 intakes. Wow. And what they noticed was that, what clients self-reported was that 33% of them had financial stress within that. So just that piece of awareness, like the
learning
in that was that this was a real issue, and that that's a lot of missed touch points and points of intervention that could have occurred if they had known that earlier. Now, thankfully, they do. So that's just an example of how we think a little thing won't have that huge an effect, but in actual fact, that's a huge outcome. And the fact that we're able to capture the data was even better.
Yeah, it proves the process, doesn't it? It's like a process of learning and iteration, and learning and iteration and learning and iteration, rather than wait till it hits the fan and then react. It's do the understanding and respond, which is really proactive way to work.
That was just one action out of the 50. So in 12 months, we were able to really affect lots of change. But that was one that, for me, I loved watching the learning of that organisation and the conversations that were had. It was quite special watching it.
That's amazing.
Hmm.
So now I have a question for all of you. I want you to come up with 2 words that come to mind when you think of connection in the context of menopause. Just 2 words. Danielle, what are your 2 words?
Relief and strength.
Relief and strength. Jenny, what are your 2 words?
I think about knowledge and actually connection to self. I said more than 2 words, but connection to self.
Michelle, what are your 2 words?
Mine are quite different. Mine were friendship and fun.
Interesting. If I had to come up with 2 words that relate to menopause and connection in menopause, it would be trust and safety.
Mm.
So 8 really different and interesting words, but all important, don't you think?
Combined, they make sense.
They do, yeah. And I guess it really proves that people think of connection in different ways, and there are different outcomes from connection in that context. We know, I suppose, we're learning more about menopause and what women need and want all the time. It's such an evolving area, but there are some really basic needs that we need to attend to. Jenny, I've got a question for you now, and just with your experience in terms of whether women get together and how they connect when they do, what are some of the most interesting trends that you've noticed?
Good question, Mel. And also just picking up, I think, a little bit on what Danielle and Michelle have already talked about. What I've noticed over the last couple of years particularly is that women are really craving more group activities and getting together. I think COVID had a really big impact in lots of different parts of our life and feeling a little bit isolated. And also what I find all the time is that life is just so busy, and women find it really hard, in my experience, to put their own needs first. And so what I see all the time, and I take many phone calls before our retreats and workshops, is, I'd like to come on my own, but I feel really nervous about it. Does anybody else come on their own? which is like a common question with all of them. But
Wow.
and it's true. So they are looking for a bit of a break. They're looking for a way to connect back to themselves, which I think is really important. But just to take them away from the hustle and bustle of their life. And it's just amazing to see when, you know, all the women get together. It always starts off, they can feel a little bit nervous and a little bit of, you know, uncertainty. But, you know, when you see that, you know, all the women are going there pretty well with the same intention, everything's a little bit different, but that sort of connection of meeting others that are going through similar things, being able to share stories, and it's just creating that space where they can reconnect back to themselves and with others. And like, it's taken me a little bit of time to really think about this connection piece, because it is at the heart of everything I do. And I know I've always done my job when I've seen women who've attended our retreats or programs that form lasting friendships and continue to support each other after the event. And I just, like, that is the thing that gives me joy out of everything that I do, because it's like really inspiring. You know, they come on their own, they're feeling a little bit nervous, then, you know, particularly a day into the retreat, all of that's forgotten. They're just having these amazing conversations, just feeling that connection and that real sense of belonging. And I'm also trying to refine how I do that. So for all of the people that love a bit of research, which I do, and I know, Mel, that you love
I
this.
do.
You do. And that, you know, the research backs up as well, that, you know, the group activities, wellness activities do wonders for our emotional well-being. It reduces stress. It, you know, it gives that sense of belonging. And like, I'm the biggest advocate now to, like, I will get on my soapbox until, you know, I do something else in another soapbox. But, you know, I really advocate for women to take the time to give themselves time away from their hustle and bustle, just as, like Danielle, you said, you know, like reconnecting back to self, you know, having enough quiet space to be able to do that. And particularly, you know, for women around our age as well, you can go through so much change as well, you know, whether kids are starting to get older and they don't necessarily need you as much, empty nesters, you know, like looking after aging parents, like there can be a lot of change. And so how is it you deliberately sort of create that space and connection with others that are going through similar things, to know that you're not alone? Yeah, so that's what I've been seeing particularly.
I love the journey you describe, and I'm curious to know what breaks the ice when those timid women say yes to themselves and to a few days away, and they get into that room and it's the first day and they're uncomfortable and they're side-eyeing everyone going, oh, what do I say? What do I do? What breaks the ice in that moment?
I think that's always like on that particular first afternoon of these retreats. And so being, you know, we generally have retreats at these beautiful, beautiful locations. And if the weather's nice, we're always outside. You know, a glass of wine always helps, and some beautiful food is a really lovely way to break the ice. But also it's the way that I show up. You know, I'm very, very conscious about my energy, you know, not just me physically, but you know, like knowing that I'm in a really good space and want to create that connection, and just to be curious and have a bit of fun, but making sure that it's also a little bit lighthearted as well. So I think, and also the other thing that I find is everyone turns up with sort of a different sort of energy, and quite often that can be because they're rushing from their end of week. They've worked all day, trying to making sure that the kids are okay. It's a lot of mental load being able to take away a few days, and really understandably so. So I'm very conscious about making sure that I just meet people where they are, no expectations. So this is their weekend to get out of it what they want. And so it is my role to be able to facilitate that. So it's not my weekend, it's their weekend. And so it's just creating enough space for them to show up how they need to show up.
I think I'm hearing your superpower, and something that's important is being able to read the room, engage where people are at, and create that space to help them settle into the present moment, which you then facilitate that with being outside and some tactile stuff and some lightheartedness to get people to kind of relax and all land in that calm energy. Yeah.
Anything could happen between like 2 days. It's extraordinary. It's such a beautiful thing. So it's one of the biggest, like toughest jobs, I think, in terms of hosting a retreat and hosting space for that long. But gosh, it's magical. It's just incredible to see what happens when people arrive to when they leave. It's the best thing.
I can hear that you love it too.
I do.
I'm going back to you, Danielle, with a question about technology, because we live in a fast-paced world. As Jenny said, we're at work and we have to unwind, and it's not just about doing your work anymore. It's about being available 24/7. It's having a mobile phone and a tablet and all of the things that we access online work, online learning, emails. There's so much that we have, apps. God, it makes me tired just thinking about it. But so maybe I'm giving away the answer here, but what effect do you think that technology has on our ability to create not just a connection, but a really resonant connection with other people?
That's such a great question. And if we think about what does it really mean, resonant connection? So it means like a deep, meaningful, impactful relationship with groups or individuals. So it's something that's deeper than surface level, where people feel like, all parties feel like they're seen, heard, and valued. So that, results in sort of strong relationships, more collaboration and a deeper sense of purpose and connection.
Mm-hmm.
So everything you just mentioned there, and then as Jenny mentioned, the busyness of life and the fact that technology allows us to speed things up, but also cram more in. So I guess it's that question, are we really having that, because there's connection and then there's resonant connection that you just mentioned. Are we really having those connections? So if we're looking at technology as a tool for connection, then we've really got to be focused on the intention of that connection. So what is it that we are really, really wanting? What is it that we want to get out of it? And, like I mentioned before, like really connecting with what's most important, because we might say things like, okay, if you have the resonant connection, then maybe I have to reduce the amount of apps and abilities, for people to contact me and my commitments. So we might say, okay, we've got to put some boundaries in place. But it's very hard to put boundaries in place if you really don't know what's most important. So I think what helps with that a lot is making things a habit and making things into rituals. So if we look at, days gone past before we had technology, we had a lot of our life was ritualized and habitualized. I don't know if that is even a word. I'm not sure.
It is.
But our environment and the expectations of how we would show up and contribute in our environment dictated what we would do on a daily basis, plus obviously the weather and electric light and all these other things. So I think if we can stay strong in terms of, or it's not even being strong, it's just identifying what's most important and creating, it doesn't even necessarily have to be boundaries. People talk about that a lot, but I get sick of words pretty quickly because they're overused.
Yeah.
But I think it's rather than setting boundaries, which seems like a block, it's more about connecting with what's most important. And then that comes back to everything else that we've been talking about beforehand. So then when you know what's important, you can prioritize. And then it's much easier to say, to turn off, your notifications. It's much easier to put your out of office on or whatever it needs to be. But I think this is the thing that I've always been conscious of since technology started growing, is that being in charge of the technology rather than letting it be in charge of you.
Yeah. Such a great point. Such a great point. And I like what you said about figuring out what's most important, because then you focus on that and everything else falls away. You don't have to try and juggle everything or fit everything in. You're just laser focused on the one or two things that matter most.
And you can use it as what I call an internal compass. So we might have a North Star that we're getting to, and we have an internal compass that helps us get there. So when we are really connected to that internal compass, then we're not necessarily fixated on that North Star all the time, but we're allowing our internal compass to guide us.
Well said, Danielle. Thank you. We've got a minute to wrap up, and I'd like to finish on a question for you all, and I'll start with you, Michelle. What is the number one way we can make a substantial difference in building our community and connection?
I think it starts with us modelling it in our own worlds. I resonate with everything that's been said, and I guess the way that I do it is, I've joined a walking group where I'm walking with women. We're competing in, or we're participating in an event in a few weeks' time, but that getting together for no other reason but to take time out for ourselves and to build that. I'm walking with people I know one of the team of 4, so I've made 2 new friends in the process, and they're younger women, but it's great because they're learning from our experience of life and things like that. So I think it's about modelling it. And if we're not doing it ourselves, we can't really encourage our clients or our broader community to do the same. I think too, it's then when thinking about our products and services that we offer, building in connection, and not just a lot of the work I do with organizations is that teamwork, so that basically, or group coaching, so that people are actually able to have that connection, learn from each other, foster relationships that then, like Jenny said, flow on to other aspects of their life. If people come to my groups and they make a friendship with each other and it continues outside of that group, that's fantastic. If workplaces feel more trust and connection with each other and they can tackle problems and solutions better, that's a fantastic outcome, and particularly for women, because a lot of women in menopause don't talk about the issues that are pertinent to them. Creating that safe, open, honest, transparent environments where those conversations can be had and help them to flourish through their journey, I think is really vital.
Thanks, Michelle. Jenny, I'll go to you next. One way we can make a substantial difference.
I could probably talk about this all day, but I will say, for me, like, building connection and community isn't always about quick results. For me, it's about nurturing relationships and creating a space of belonging that can grow over time. And just for me, probably a few little buzzwords in here, but I think in this context, it's relevant. It's by being authentic, empathetic, patient. We can really make a difference in how people connect and build meaningful communities. So that's my one tip.
Thanks, Jenny. And Danielle?
Building on everything everyone else has said, live and breathe what we preach and teach in all our roles. Being congruent, interact with people with curiosity, respect, and openness, and focus less on what divides us and more on what binds us.
I love that. That sounds like a mantra I could print out and stick on the wall.
Yeah. I say it all the time. My kids are sick of me saying it.
Ladies, thanks so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time and the rich conversation about connection. Thank you so much. If anyone is interested in learning more about Danielle, Jenny, or Michelle, please get in touch with us and we will connect you. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye for now.